A lot of people assume leadership gets easier once you know what you're doing. But in my experience, it's almost the opposite. How do you make a decision when you don't actually feel certain about it?
Yeah. Uncertainty isn't something that you should actively seek to eliminate, but it's rather something that you learn to operate within. You've got to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. I used to think that confidence came before action, and now I've come to realize that you've got to take action, and confidence comes as a result of that.
How often did clarity come before the decision versus after it?
I ended up wiping out Xerox's entire HR database. And I
Oh
can
boy.
tell you, I can feel that the blood rising to my head right now. It was significantly worse down there, and I thought, that's it. No one's ever going to want to hire me again. That's it. My career's done. You'll never look at missteps in the same way.
Was there any kind of pressure felt knowing that it wasn't just your decision?
The universe will reward action, not thought.
You're being judged or misunderstood. Indecision is more dangerous than the wrong decision.
There are no excuses. There will be no excuses. You've got to assume complete accountability.
Kree Govender is a leadership advisor who draws on his journey from apartheid-era South Africa to Canada to help leaders navigate uncertainty, especially in the evolving age of AI.
Alchemists, if you're listening and want to support the show right now, head over to our YouTube channel and subscribe. Growing the channel lets me bring on more incredible guests like the one we have today. Let's get back to our episode. A lot of people assume leadership gets easier once you know what you're doing. Like, once you have the experience, the title, the track record, you start to feel more certain. But in my experience, it's almost the opposite. The more responsibility you have, the more you realize how often you don't have a clear answer. And that's where most people get stuck. Not because they're not capable, but because they're waiting to feel ready. So Kree, I want to start very simple. How do you make a decision when you don't actually feel certain about it?
Yeah. And it's something that shows up in life, both personally and professionally. So it's not necessarily purely in the professional context. And I've come to believe, Tyler, over my time, that uncertainty isn't something that you should actively seek to eliminate, but it's rather something that you learn to operate within. You've got to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And earlier on in my career, I used to think that confidence came before action. And now I've come to realize that you've got to take action, and confidence comes as a result of that. Whether the outcome is the outcome that you had initially envisaged, fantastic. If not, you've got to be okay with the fact that this is going to drive learning in you. The things that matter most to me right now when it comes to making decisions in areas of uncertainty really speak more to my value system now that enables me to go and make decisions, which is, does this line up with my values? Am I very clear on the intent that this is going to drive? And the last piece ties back to something I just said, which is, am I willing to learn from this if I'm wrong in that decision?
And I've had previous guests say the quote, ready, fire, aim. And I love that quote. It's grown on me quite a bit.
I like that.
And I listened to the Dalton Fisher podcast, and he's talking with somebody on there right now who says, former Navy SEAL, who says, no matter what, take a step, right? You're not risking a life by stepping in the wrong direction with the decisions most of us are making in our day-to-days. And you just need to take a step, because you can make corrective steps as you need to go.
Yeah.
So, Kree, when you look back, how often did clarity come before the decision versus after it?
I would say early on in my career, it often came after, just because I had very little data by way of lived experience to go off. And as time went on, as I built and layered in more experiences, you're able to recognize patterns or potential scenarios that may translate just purely as a result of your lived experience. So now I'm taking the benefit of age on that front. As I've matured and as I've aged, I'm able to spot things out a little bit easier. But more so than that, it's actually the understanding of self. Earlier on in my career, when I was young, every single time I was afraid of making a misstep, and the ramifications to me felt like those would be career ending. I remember very early in my career, I was a developer, and at that stage, developers were allowed to develop on live environments, go figure. And I ended up wiping out Xerox's entire HR database. Um, and I
Oh
can
boy.
tell you, I can feel that the blood rising to my head right now. It was significantly worse down there, and I thought, that's it. No one's ever going to want to hire me again. That's it. My career's done. I've got to go pivot into something else out of technology. But there was so much learning that came out of that moment, and that's where you learn the most, and that's where the experiences come from. It's not trying to avoid the hard moments, making a decision and recognizing that yes, there is potential for failure, there is potential for hardship in there, but really leaning into the experience and saying, what is this experience trying to teach me on the other side
Mhm.
versus why is this happening to me? And that's a fundamental reframe. And if you reframe it in that way, you'll never look at missteps in the same way. One final thing before I hand it back to you for the dialogue, at risk of making this a monologue, but I read an article that said many organizations, when they're looking for senior leaders, CEOs, CIOs, any sort of C level, they're not just looking for people that have come from success. They're looking for people that have been through a significant, in inverted commas, failure, because they want to know that when hard times do arrive, that you've navigated through one and that you've learned from those lessons and you can apply them, because hard times will show up.
Yeah, I really like the phrase you start to see the real people when you say no, and you also start to see the real people when they fail, right? Because everybody through the lens of like social media, Instagram, they want to present their best. They want to do their best. They want to interview their best. And
Uh,
on their first days, they want to perform their best. But we need to see them on those days where they are performing their worst as well, because that's going to tell us who they really are. Did you at least have autosave back in those times when you were when you wiped out all that?
no, I did not.
Oh
I
no.
did not.
Okay.
I did not.
Hopefully,
Well,
hopefully it didn't take too
I
long to get those back up.
I learned very quickly from that to actually make a copy of the database before I started working on it once again. So that was the best
Oh,
teacher.
excellent.
Sometimes you've got to feel those experiences on your skin, and they need to burn on your skin for them to be imprinted in your mind.
Well, and you learn something from it very valuable that you probably never forget to do again, right? So
Absolutely.
that's huge. Alchemists, today's guest has lived through the kind of situations where there is no perfect timing and no clear path. From growing up in apartheid South Africa to making the decision to move his family to Canada without ever having visited. Kree's story is built around stepping into uncertainty and figuring it out in real time. Now he works with leaders and organizations navigating another kind of uncertainty, the shift into AI, and how leadership needs to evolve alongside it. This conversation is really about what leadership looks like when things aren't clear and why that's where it's built. Kree, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join me on the Elemental Educator podcast. It's my pleasure to have you here today.
Oh, it's fantastic to be here. I love the work that you're doing, and it's really grounded in servitude, which matters a lot to me. So thank you, Tyler, for this.
Thank you very much. And, using the word grounded is a very nice way to segue into our first element. There's 4 elements we're going to go through today, the first being the earth element. And so let's jump in to grounded moments.
3, 2, 1.
Leadership is an opportunity to serve. It's not a trumpet call to self-importance. Where did that idea come from for you?
Mm. It was very early on in my own leadership career. I come from a very technical background, and there was a leader who saw something in me that spoke to him around the attributes of leadership. And so he put me through business school effectively. I just didn't have the funds to do it. And coming out of there, one of the modules was around leadership. And there were various forms of leadership that they had spoken about. But this aspect of being a servant leader, not a subservient leader, but a servant leader, really appealed to me. And I can connect very clearly where that came from. And that comes from my childhood. Both my parents were educators. So all that I saw growing up was them serving young minds.
Uh-huh.
So mom and dad, all the time, that's what they did. Over and above that, my mom ran a support group for abused women within the community. So I saw service at a social level coming through from there. And critically, in the time that I had grown up, racial divide was a very strong thing in apartheid and its implementation. And I saw my parents being political activists and what that meant in terms of trying to serve the greater good and trying to serve a nation at large in their own small way. So those were elements that I had grown up with. So when I had made the transition into business from being a student, it felt like a very natural thing for me to connect back into and hang my hat on that as a leadership philosophy. It's also a very humbling leadership philosophy because it nullifies in many ways the hierarchical structures that we've come to know for many years. And I often try and hold myself accountable. I have a set of team oaths. Whenever I connect with the team, I say, these are the things you can really hold me accountable for. And I try my best not to traverse those lines. And being in the front lines with them, there's no task that should be beyond me, because if a task is beyond me, then serving and leadership will always be beyond me.
Yeah. And with that, I think it's also important to note that service in leadership comes in many different ways. And before I even got into education, I really wanted to be a physiotherapist. And I viewed it as a way of serving others too. But I actually hated that type of service because whenever I fixed somebody or helped with something, I liked the interaction and the human connection. And anytime I saw those people that I served after, it was like I didn't exist. But as an educator, as like a tennis coach and a former one, when you serve people and you see them later, they want to have an interaction with you. And so I think any profession you can find a way to lead with service or have servant leadership in it. But you also still have to find the type of servant leadership that suits your needs too. And so how did you learn within the realm of what servant leadership is, how you liked to serve?
Yeah, it was a bit of trial and error. And initially, the type of leadership that I was exposed to, and here we're talking late 90s, early 2000s, my first job that I ever had, my boss's boss was ex-military. So everything for him was regimented. It's like if you were a minute late, I would still remember he had this office with glass all around it, and people would be lined up in there, and you'd have to report back as to why you were just a minute late. So he really led with a very strict and disciplinarian manner. And I saw the results that he had delivered for the business. And that then became the archetype in my mind as to how one should lead. Um, and there are certain situations where that's necessary, for sure, where you have to be absolutely directive. There's very little room for any other approach, just because lives could be lost. Clarity matters more than anything else, and action. But in a corporate setting, there are very few cases under which those circumstances should transpire. So initially, when I had the opportunity to go out and lead a team, I tried to emulate that. But there's an interesting thing about your DNA and about your gut. It tells you very quickly whether something's in alignment with who you are as a person, and whether something is going against your grain. So the very first time I tried that as an approach, it didn't resonate with me. It didn't sit well. And what came about was really a process of exploration and gradual uh, experimentation with things that came naturally and intuitively to me, combined with me understanding and reading about various types of leadership philosophies. I'm quite a voracious leader, and the book I would say that had the most profound impact on me was Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership that I had come across, and I said, "Wow, this was something that I could take some of those frameworks and principles and apply." And it then became a stitching together of various principles and various frameworks to land with the one that I implement today.
Kree, where do you see leaders drift away from this idea of leadership without necessarily realizing that they've drifted?
Yeah, it's, I would say, is when you start to compromise who you are, especially at a value and moral and ethical level. And when I say that, people may take a line through this and say, "Oh, you may be doing something that's blatantly corrupt." It doesn't have to be as severe as that. Your stance can be tested in even smaller ways. Um, Real life example, there was mm, there was a company that I was in. I'll remove the name for just to protect this and maintain the anonymity. But there was a policy in place which was the bottom 10% of your sales force needed to be um, put on a performance improvement plan at the end of every quarter. I felt that the policy was far too draconian. There were many other things that were at play, and it discounted things such as deal life cycles, situations that people may have been encountering from a personal standpoint. And I was asked to implement this. So, very much rank and file. You've got to execute on this. That's a directive. And it went against my grain, but I did it. And Tyler, I cannot tell you, just physically, like just talking about it right now, I can feel those emotions coming up again. And it resulted in a few sleepless nights and eventually ended up with me putting in my resignation, um, because I didn't want to compromise on that. And that's what happens. That's how leaders drift sometimes, where you're being asked to do things that maybe even minor corrections to things that you would otherwise not do of your own accord, out of
Yeah.
fear, more often than not. And that's where I see people failing leadership and leadership failing them.
And I've stepped into some leadership roles where, what was done in the past was simply just repeated so that I thought that was the way it would go. And it didn't feel right to do those things. And I started to question, why do we do it that way? Why do we do it that way? And eventually I got to the answer of, I have no idea why we do it that way. So then it's really easy to change that. Um, but when your hands are tied in like a situation you're saying where, maybe if you don't comply, your job's now on the line anyway, that's a difficult place to be and to submit your resignation on it. Like that takes a lot of um, guts, grit, but also sticking to what you value to know that you're going to do that. And so I think that that's very very commendable of you to say this isn't right and I'm going to stand up for it. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and once again, I can tie that back into what I saw growing up.
Uh-huh.
And well, the gentleman that's in the picture behind me is a prime example of that. There were many instances in which he could have buckled and made a deal, but he was so principled and stuck to his value system and what mattered most to him. And his brand of leadership was unflinching and uncompromising in that manner.
Yeah.
I often say to my salespeople, I said, there are many things that are up for sale, but your integrity and your value system should not be one of them.
Yeah. What a great thing to share with them as well. Let's lighten the mood a bit here, Kree. Let's jump into a game.
Yeah, let's
This
go.
game is called Principle or Preference. So I'll read a statement, and really it's more like, do you agree with this or do you not agree with it? So I maybe need to change the name of the game. But if you agree and you think everybody should take this on, then it's a principle. If you disagree with it or you think that it's more of just a preference for people, then you say preference. Okay.
Got it?
If lately I've said there's no time to explain your answer, but if we get into a hot debate here, we'll get into a hot debate. It's happened before, it might happen again. So, principle or preference, leaders should always appear confident.
That's a preference.
You should wait until you have clarity before making a decision.
Preference.
Leadership means having the answers.
Preference.
Personal sacrifice is required for growth.
Principle.
You should protect stability over taking risks.
Preference.
Leaders should prioritize people over outcomes.
Principle.
You need a clear plan before taking action.
Preference.
Experience matters more than potential.
Preference.
Discomfort is a signal to slow down.
Preference.
And action is more valuable than overthinking.
Principle.
There's our game, Kree. I want to come back to our first principle you shared, which was personal sacrifice is required for growth. Why is that principle for you?
Once again, it's lived experience. And there's a saying I had written down in my journal. It's actually sitting here behind me somewhere. I can pull it up. It's something that I had read when I was thinking about manifesting this move to Canada. And it said, the cave you fear to enter contains the riches you seek. And if I chronicle back through everything that I've experienced, and countless others have as well, it's always come with some degree of personal trade-off. Coming here, as much as it's been wonderful from a job perspective, from a family standpoint, platforms, and a host of other things, there's been a significant personal sacrifice in terms of leaving behind family and friends and people that I'm very close to. That's just one example. So for me, wiring back through all of my lived experience, I've often found that there's been a degree of personal sacrifice that's had to come with obtaining something else. There's always a price to pay for either action and or inaction. There will be a price to pay.
So let's go to a real moment for you. When you made the decision to move your family to Canada, what did that actually feel like at the time?
It was very clear when this little being had shown up in our lives. He was a while in the manifestation, and thankfully God saw it fit to provide us with the opportunity to be parents. And many people wax lyrically about just what a big moment having children is and how it changes your outlook. And for me, it didn't happen instantaneously. It took some time. As I got to know him and he got to know me, and we built this relationship, and then things started to shift slowly, but they shifted nevertheless. And I found myself sitting there just post-COVID, and after a particularly challenging time in the country as well, with rioting and a significant amount of just looting and violence in some areas, I said, where do I want to give this child the best opportunities and the best platform? And that then became the why. And the why then really drove everything else. Everything else went into the background, and the why came into the foreground. And there's a quote that I had come across which said, if your why is big enough, then any how becomes possible. And then that became the number one mission, was how do we make this translate? How do we transform that from a vision into something that's actually tangible? And what's the work back plan for that? And we started to work the plan.
Was there any kind of pressure felt knowing that it wasn't just your decision?
Oh, massively so. Massively so. If anything, I think I probably failed on the brief. When I had initially spoken to my wife about a potential move, we hadn't necessarily settled on Canada. Um, Canada kind of chose us as opposed to us choosing Canada. But she had said two things to me. She said, "Hey, listen, we're in South Africa. We've got family here. It would be nice if we had the ability to travel back and forth without too much challenge. Try and stay in a place with a similar sort of time zone so that you're not traversing 6, 7 hours." And she says, "We can go anywhere. Just make sure it's not far and it's not cold." And so I think I failed on both.
And you picked Canada.
But
Yeah.
because this podcast is about leadership,
Yeah.
there's a leadership story in here, Tyler, that I think you'll appreciate. I had shared with my mentor what I wanted to do, and he gave me phenomenal advice and something that I had not factored into my evaluation process. He said, "Kree,
Mhm.
you're going to find a job. Like, I'm sure of it, but evaluate the leader even more than you're going to evaluate the role." Because he says it's just going to be the three of you. You're going to go there on a work permit. If you don't gel with your leader, if you don't like the leadership style and you want to move, unless it's within Microsoft, you're going to have to pack your bags and you have to go back. Also, it's not just a work move for you. You're going to need to come in and get a son. You're going to have to find a home. You're going to have to get OHIP cards and integrate into society. It's going to involve a fair amount of your time. And your parents will get old. Things will happen back in South Africa that will pull you there for probably extended periods. You need a leader who's bought into your why as much as you're bought into your why. And then that just reframed how I started evaluating the roles that were available. And his advice was sound because the leader that I ended up choosing, or the leader had to choose me too, ended up being the best person for me and my family to enable us to come here and settle and thrive. So,
Well, that's
leadership
great
in
to
a
hear.
different light.
Yeah. Looking back now, what did this decision teach or build for you in terms of your own leadership skills?
So, the first part was we didn't even visit Canada. It was, we made the decision. I met this gentleman on a Teams call. And I went into the room that night and I said to my wife, I said, "This is the guy that we got to go and work for." And after I got over the initial shock that it was going to be far and cold, um, there was no hesitating. We sold up everything. We jumped on a plane. And the first time we entered Canada was the day that we landed.
Mhm.
What it taught me about leadership are the following things. Number one, when you don't need all of the data and all of the certainty to make a decision. The universe will reward action, not thought. You've got to have that number one as the number one thing. Have a bias for action because if you wait too long, it will end up in paralysis. So 80% rule. If you have 80% of the information, go ahead and make the decision. That's number one. Number two, understand if this is a one-way door or a two-way door. So like a reversible versus irreversible decision. If we had come and we didn't enjoy things or just didn't pan out, it would cost us some money, probably a fair amount of money, but we could rewire and head back. It wasn't a one-way door. So, but not all decisions carry that same weight. But move quickly on the reversible ones is one of the things that I learned about leadership. And then slow down when it comes to the ones that are irreversible. That's when you should not lean into the 80%, but rather think I need 90% of that information before
Mhm.
if it's at all possible to make that decision. So it's on a spectrum. And action is what creates the data, right? This is tying back to probably our initial questions. You can think your way into a better decision, but you can also act your way into better information. And by action and with that information, it empowers you to make better decisions along the way. And the final piece was just being very anchored back in that why. When things get noisy and tough, the why really becomes your filter in terms of why am I doing this? What am I doing? And does this support that why?
Thank you for sharing. And it's a great message, right? I like what you're saying here on if it's reversible, just make the damn decision already. If it's irreversible, then maybe take some more time to think it through. And speaking of the adversity that you've faced here with these decisions, it's a good way to segue into our air element. And so we'll jump in to element number 2 here on headwinds and tailwinds. And all right, Kree, we are kicking off headwinds and tailwinds with a game right away. This game is called the hot seat. So you're sitting in it. I'm going to give you a scenario on something that's happening in someone's life, and I just want your first response on what they should be doing. Okay?
Got it?
Okay, so you're in a leadership role, but you don't fully feel ready for it.
Oh, that's the question?
Yeah, so
Okay.
what should they be doing?
What should they be doing? I would say for myself, there's never been a role that I've entered and I was like, I've got this completely locked in. I know I'm going to be performing from day number one. I think that element of not feeling fully prepared, I don't want to label it imposter syndrome. I personally, I don't like that as a term. I think it's far too harsh. But people not feeling like they're fully prepared or that they're highly proficient in what they're walking into is a fantastic thing, because that element of fear is what keeps you sharp. As long as it doesn't drive paralysis and doesn't mute you in terms of who you are as a person and quieten and dim your light and your voice, and it's repurposed as fuel to say, okay, I've got to move now from across a different spectrum to get towards proficiency. I'll share something with you a little bit later on, Tyler, but it's a framework that I picked up in a book, and it was called the Leadership Circle of Success. And it says that you move from a space of knowing very little. So if you think about maybe even your first role, or if you've made a pivot into a new leadership role as an example, you're at a point where you're not adding significant value. But as you spend more time and the organization invests in you and you learn and you experience, etc., you move to a place where you're delivering value. You move to a place of competence. You move to a place of importance. And that's when you should be seeking out the next challenge to kind of like reset yourself and move yourself back into that space of learning. Because if you stay too long, you move into self-indulgence and eventually like self-destruction in that circle. But it's very important to know where you are at which stage in any particular role. And so if you're acutely aware that you're at a space and you're not highly proficient, it's a space of learning. That is the biggest amount of learning you will ever have in that role. And that, quite frankly, for me is energizing. I love to be in spaces where I know very little. My curiosity is fueled and I'm constantly learning. So lean into the learning would be my message.
Okay. Next one here is you have to make a decision that affects your family.
That could be one of two things. It could be something positive. It could be something that could be potentially detrimental. My guidance here would be you've got to be in lockstep with your partner, first and foremost. Do not make that decision in isolation, irrespective of what the decision is, because you're going to be a unit. And if you're single, or whoever your significant other is, or the people that are going to be impacted, make that decision together. There are times when you need to be directive. There are also times where you need to collaborate, and there needs to be a degree of interlock, understanding, and consensus before moving forward. So that would be my advice. Then, when it comes to family, for me, that's high priority as it would be for most people, be very gentle with that process. Don't rush it. So that's one way you should slow down, stop, pause, really deliberate intentionally on what the outcome could potentially be on the decision you're going to make.
Next one here is you don't have enough information to feel confident in a decision.
Take action. Take an action. If there's not going to be much more information that's coming, choose a course, put a plan together, and take action. And be okay with the fact that it may not translate the way that you want it to, but coming out of it, there will be learning. And so then you've got data for the next time you encounter a similar scenario, and you'll likely make a better decision the second time around. But take action.
And last one here, you're being judged or misunderstood.
Don't get defensive. That's the first thing. Don't try to explain yourself away, and don't let it affect who you are. So you cannot be responsible for what other people feel and think. You're responsible for your own thoughts and feelings. And as long as it's in alignment with who you are as a person, your values, and your belief system, you need to be okay with that. It's a very tough job trying to bring the world on side on every one of your decisions, and having everybody like you and accept you. One of my leaders said, if you want to be liked, go sell ice cream.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You know, Kree, you've experienced a lot of uncertainty in many ways, and we've talked a little bit about moving countries and what that taught you about pressure. But how did growing up in apartheid shape how you think about leadership?
It was a very interesting time growing up because we had little to no interaction outside of people that were our own race. And apartheid was designed in that manner, and very much in a caste type system where there was a defined pecking order that created a lot of friction. So your dreams were very much tailored according to where you were in that status. And that can be exceptionally limiting. Even once the veil of apartheid had come down, that doesn't disappear with just democracy. It takes decades of unwinding before that really starts to translate into society at large. And I will still say that that work is still being done right now. What it meant for me in terms of leadership was there was a very clear dichotomy between the people that were in my peer group. We all had this access to similar sort of opportunities, but there were those that couldn't break free of that mental construct, and what it had done to their confidence and where their dreams had been uh, appropriately tailored, and they never reached their potential. And there were others that saw this as a clear call to action. Um, the vision that Mandela had painted for us in terms of you can go out now, you do have the ability to go out, and here's what I've done through my actions over 27 years of incarceration to create this platform for you. I pretty much took that as my call to action in light of that, to say there's no way that I'm going to squander an opportunity that this man had put 27 of his own years behind bars to afford us. There's no way I'm going to squander that opportunity. So it went back to action, taking action. The path was not clear. The opportunities were not clear, but taking action and backing yourself and understanding that you will find a way and having an indomitable spirit, that's what came to the fore. There was a book that I read by Nancy Cohn from Harvard Business Review. It's called Forged in Fire, and it chronicles some of the great leaders that have been through very testing and trying times, like Ernest Shackleton. There was a piece on Frederick Douglass that was in there, and they didn't have information that was very clear to them. The path to them looked very uncertain, but they took action.
Mhm.
They took the steps that others then followed. And that's what became very clear to me.
You know, I appreciate the stories and what you're sharing here, but I'd like to know within it a little bit more. How do those moments show up in how you lead today?
They show up in servitude, firstly. So everything that Mandela ended up doing was in service of an entire nation, not just the people that were oppressed, but the oppressors as well.
Mhm.
One of the greatest things, I think, is one of his greatest lessons that actually took me by surprise. When he was released, one of his first addresses to the nation at large was, "Throw your weapons into the sea." You had an entire nation, a majority, that were oppressed for such a long time. There was a lot of anger that was in there. And now that you had democracy, um, almost a human instinct would be to now get revenge on the perpetrators. And I thought that that was such a beautiful moment. Even though I was young, it was not lost on me that he had the foresight to understand that we need to do this together. Two rights don't make a wrong. And often, when things occur in a business context or in life where there's conflict, um, I always think, how can I best serve in this moment rather than adopting a finite position? It often occurs with very irate customers. Things go wrong. And those are actually the calls that I look forward to the most. Not because I'm a masochist, but because I like to think about, how can I diffuse the situation? How can I best be of service here? And Bill Gates had a saying at Microsoft, and he said, "Your most unhappy customers can be the source of your greatest learning." And if you
Mhm.
adopt those two things as a mindset, how can I genuinely be of service here? You will protect your space, you will protect your energy, and you're able to slowly but surely shift and shape that conversation. And if you approach it with, what can I learn here? So those are things that I've taken away, both from Mandela as well as Bill Gates, back into some of my own learning, and that's how it plays out. So many people often say that I've got a very calm demeanor. Uh, it's more because I hang on to those as the principles, and I always try and hold them front and center when I enter into
Mhm.
conversation.
Thanks for sharing that, Kree. We're going to jump into, speaking of some statements here. We're going to jump into our last part of the headwinds and tailwinds segment here, and it's another game. It's called Flip the Script.
Mm.
So I'm going to give you either, well, like, I try to make them negative statements, but sometimes people will agree with them. So I'm going to give you a statement, and if you think it should be something else, I want you to reword it for me into what you want that statement to be. Or if you agree with it, just say you agree with it and tell me why.
Okay.
Okay. So let's see if you're going to flip the script, or let's see if we're just going to agree. First statement is, I need more clarity before I act.
Make a decision with the information that you have at hand.
Next one is, I'm not ready yet.
That is fear that's masquerading.
I don't have enough experience.
Similar statement.
This feels too risky.
Once again, it's related to fear.
Yeah. And I'll move when things settle down.
There is no time like the present.
I like that. And speaking of moving, we'll use that to segue into our next element, our third element, and we'll jump into water, or ripples of change. You're working with leaders right now navigating AI. What are people getting wrong about this shift?
They think that it's purely a technology shift where it's an absolute rewiring, not just of culture, but also business processes. So in here, there's a significant amount of adversity and friction that starts to show up because people have this absolute desire to see what the ROI is. But this technology is unlike anything we've ever experienced before. So it's harder and a lot more nebulous for us to wrap our hands around. And trying to land that as a message, especially with executives, becomes pretty challenging when you're trying to help them move through this change. Quite frankly, from my vantage point, it's a technology or a set of technologies that any organization that fails to adopt these will more than likely find themselves displaced, if not obsolete. And that's a tough message to land in a way that doesn't drive fear in the recipients, whilst still being respectful to them and the institutions that they've built.
Why is this more about mindset than technology?
Because for the first time, it's got to be not just a tool that you use, but rather this is going to be woven into the very DNA of your organization. We're at a point where we're going to have synthetic employees. So these are going to be digital representatives that will show up very much in the same way that humans do. They will need coaching, they will need instruction, they will need to learn, they will be hired and fired. So it's a very different time that we're going to live through. It's not just going to be human organic capacity, but it's also going to be synthetic digital capacity.
Uh-huh.
And this motion of a tool and training once and or train the trainer and training once and implement and deploy, it goes away. Because here is where you're going to be building habits, where you're going to be building reflexive AI skills that initially starts off in productivity in terms of how you run your own workday and your workspace, but will eventually start to open up the aperture around how can we reinvent our products, how can we change customer engagement, and how can we develop or enhance our business processes and even start up new lines of business once you take your innate understanding after developing those reflexive AI skills and then start to layer them into your business overall.
Uh-huh. Where are we going to see people fall behind?
Those that are resistant to change, those that believe that this is just another wave and just another hype cycle and that this too shall pass, and those that, quite frankly, have the intellectual horsepower and have been able to outwork the system up until now. But I see the changes happening at scale. I've seen how that approach is not going to serve. You're going to have a learner's mindset, be okay with being uncomfortable. There was a KPMG study that was done recently. And apart from looking for people with AI skills, the number one characteristic that employers are looking for are for people that have a learn it all mindset. Those that are willing to learn and relearn, go through disruption and still maintain optimism and want to lean into the learning. And I think it was Accenture who recently let go of 10,000 people. And those 10,000 were actually the people that had not, that were resistant to the change. They said, we've given you enough time. This has been a year and a half or 2 years. If you've not made significant progress in terms of your own learning and building those reflexive skills, um, you're not on the same wavelength as the rest of the organization. So I'm starting to see it change there. I'm starting to see it show up in compensation metrics for people. Shopify, Duolingo, Accenture, like your promotions, your performance increases are all now tied into how well you're leveraging and using these technologies. So some of it artificially engineered so that you start to make these reflexive skills, but all with the same end goal in mind in terms of this fundamental cultural and organizational shift.
I think this is a good time for you to walk me through your AAA framework. So
Mm.
so what is it and how does it help leaders make better decisions?
Um, um, I've had the privilege and opportunity of interviewing hundreds of people uh, in my time at Microsoft and before that. And there were, over time, the data started to show me a couple of things in terms of who are the people that ended up being the best people to work in my team and the best performers. And they were not necessarily always the people that had the best track record or had the best profiles or the highest number of certifications. And I eventually came up with this framework called the AAA framework, which I use to evaluate people and decide whether they'll be a good fit for my business and my team. The first one is your aptitude. So, do you have the ability to learn and relearn continuously? Because change can either happen to you or it can happen with you. And in Microsoft, I've been here for 10 years. There's never been a year or at least more than an 11-month cycle before change happens to us. Either it's a new operating model, it's a new way that the teams are structured. It's constantly morphing and flexing and changing, um, often because we've got first mover advantage. But that doesn't come with standing still or being complacent with what we've done. It's about innovating, testing something out, seeing if it works. And if it doesn't, let's go back, let's rewind, let's pivot, and let's try something else. So it's this constant cycle of innovation, which can be very energizing if you choose to see it in that light. So that's number one, your aptitude. Number two is your attitude. So, what type of energy does this person bring? Is this person going to bring the right attributes that contribute to the culture? And over time, I've even adapted that because initially I was looking for people which are a culture fit, meaning that they were going to be similar to the culture that we had created. And now sometimes I look for people that have a culture that's almost adjacent to what we have, because sometimes a little bit of like constructive tension can create something even more beautiful, as opposed to just having this echo chamber of people that are acting and thinking in a similar way. So that's my second A. So what type of attitude are you bringing? Are you somebody who shows up with energy, with curiosity, who's going to lift the collective energy of that team? Um, and I'm not looking for people that shrink, that want to be separatist. I want to have very much a flat hierarchy, but people that go to bat for each other. And then the final one is your ability to assimilate change. Tying back to the story I just shared, outside of Microsoft, the world at large, you can't go 2 days without seeing some new major announcement that's being made or something significant that's transpired in the world of AI. So you've got to be okay with this. You've got to be okay with and moving through the cycles of, oh my gosh, this is happening to me. Okay, this is now the status quo. How do we move back into performance very quickly? And the faster you can move through those cycles, your ability to assimilate that change is something that I look for. So those are my three A's, Tyler.
Thank you for sharing them. Where do people get hiring wrong?
When they look for replicas of themselves, I've seen that far too often. So confirmation bias is a very dangerous thing, and that's where I've seen people make the biggest pitfalls in their hiring. It goes back to what I just shared around the culture piece. I was looking for people that kind of fit that mold of the team that I was shaping. But I found over time that you've also got to have diverse viewpoints. Having that mix within there more often than not leads to better outcomes. And that's the biggest one. I see people measuring people by their own metrics, the way that they work, expecting the same of others, and then you're just building a team of robots. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Essentially. Right. So, speaking of the decisions that you're making in the hiring process, we'll use that to jump to our final elemental segment, our fire element on decision making. So let's get into spark or burn. Alchemists, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify and you're enjoying this episode, it would mean everything to me if you head over to that platform quickly and give us a rating or a review. Giving those ratings and reviews help us reach more of an audience for the show. And that is the entire goal of what we're trying to do, impact. Thank you so much. Welcome to Spark or Burn. We're going to kick this off, Kree, with our final game. And this game is called Final Answer. I'm just going to give you 2 words, and you have to pick one. And then that word will continue to face as a champion other words until we end up at the end, okay? And we'll see which word becomes your champion.
I like it. Let's go.
So the first 2 words that I need you to pick between are clarity or action.
Action.
Action or confidence.
Action.
Action or discipline.
Discipline.
Discipline or courage.
Discipline.
Discipline or stability.
Discipline.
Discipline or growth.
Discipline.
Discipline or adaptability.
Discipline.
Discipline or responsibility.
Discipline.
Discipline or momentum.
Discipline.
And discipline or belief.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Discipline.
And your final answer is discipline. The only one I got you to switch from was action to discipline. So let's start with, why was discipline your final answer? And why did we switch from action?
Because there's a book that I had read called Extreme Ownership it's based on the frameworks of the Navy SEALs by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin.
Uh-huh.
One of the fundamental tenets in the book is discipline equals freedom. Everything that the SEALs do is driven around discipline. And it allows them to quieten out the noise. It prevents them from being reactive to things that are happening around them, to be able to control their breathing and drive clarity in moments that for most human beings would feel overwhelming and chaotic. So that's one. It's something that stuck with me. There's that piece, but there's also my upbringing. I am a very disciplined individual, at least I think I am. And my day starts at 4 a.m. every single day. Everything's in my diary. It's run like a well-oiled machine. And I've seen the benefits of doing that over time, because discipline will eventually lead into action if the right steps are in place. And it may feel a little bit rigid to people, but there was also something else in the book that I read that really stood out for me, which was, how you do anything is how you do everything. That really speaks to discipline. So by being disciplined of self, you can translate that into your life. And that's how you'll maintain control. That's how you'll be able to set forward plans. That's how you'll be able to execute on them. That's how you'll be able to drive towards outcomes and objectives. And critically, that's how you can create that level of clarity for your teams as well.
Kree, before coming on the show, I asked you to share with me a hill that you're willing to die on. And what you shared was indecision is more dangerous than the wrong decision. Why do you believe that so strongly?
That goes back to something a lot more personal. Um, it deals with my father, which is he. If you look at a spectrum, I have a strong bias for action. He sits on the other end of the spectrum where indecision turns into procrastination and not making any decisions. And I've lived with that for 47 years of my life, and it's been an area of friction for us at moments. So that's where it came from. As a kid growing up, I was like, "Oh, I got to get this done. Let's move." And he was like slow, measured, far too methodical, and it ground me down in that way. So that was my impetus to say, okay, I've got to find a balance here. It can't just be action without any sort of thought, because that's reckless. But somewhere in between is a fantastic place to be.
What's the most important thing we haven't talked about?
Making time for yourself. Often as leaders, we're not just leading in the work context. We lead in multiple domains of life, on the home front, outside in society. And when I look at the leaders that I've admired the most, I see that that often comes with an element of self-sacrifice, often in the form of health and well-being. So whilst they may have a few practices that they incorporate into their lives, whether it's meditative, whether it's breathing, excuse me, whether it's yoga, whatever it may be, I often see them compromising on something else, be it nutrition, be it on quality of sleep, trying to have all of those components together, like the body, the mind, and the soul, uh, is tough for leaders. And because many of them genuinely want to serve, and many of them genuinely have big, bold ambitions, they they often do it at the cost of themselves.
Uh-huh. Kree, I have a tradition on the show where my previous guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who they are when we're talking, what we'll be talking about. This question is coming to you from Donovan Bailey. He's the former world record holder of the 100-meter sprint, represented Canada at the Olympics and a gold medalist. And the question that he's left for you is, if you're not achieving the goals that you want to achieve today, what is your excuse?
There are no excuses. There will be no excuses. You've got to assume complete accountability. Goes back to what I shared around the book by the Navy SEALs, extreme ownership. So irrespective of whether the decision that you make is a good one, or if there's or if there's a casualty that results out of it, the leader assumes full accountability for it. Like, no blaming, no going into these are the things that happen, that it's no, it's your full accountability. You own it. So extreme ownership. So there's no one else to blame. You've got to make.
And what is a question?
Mm,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, you've got to own those decisions and the outcomes.
And what is a question you would like to leave our next guest?
What is a crucible moment in your leadership journey? What was it, and how did it shape you into the leader you are today?
I'll make sure we get that to them. Kree, thank you so much for giving me your time on the show today. For people that might want to follow up, learn more about you, check out your resources, where can they best find you?
The best place to find me is on LinkedIn, Tyler. That's
Okay.
my platform of choice.
Okay, we will make sure that it's linked in the description, and any of the articles you mentioned, if you want to send them my way before we release the show, do so, and I'll make sure they're all in the description of the show as well. Kree, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join me.
Oh, thank you, Tyler. This was really, really amazing. I can't believe we've just clocked out an hour on the show. It's been a very engaging discussion. I hope it's been good for you and the audience.
Always. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the show. If you have feedback, a suggestion, or just want to start a conversation, fire off an email to me, tyler@elementaleducator.com. I actually read them. And if this episode sparks something, leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps more leaders find the show. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, where I put out additional content. I'll see you next time, same time, same place.